guess you could hear me. So anyway, I don't have a whole lot to say, but thanks for coming to the class this evening. This is Brad Clayton broadcasting from my basement in Philadelphia. Okay, yeah, sounds like you can hear me. And I don't have a tremendous amount prepared to say. Just wanted to introduce myself as the new director for the energy program at the College of Technology. Just started this fall, just started in April, and already off to a pretty good start. I've got 100 students in the program so far. A lot of them are non-traditional students coming back, working in industry, and really we have several goals with the program, one of which is to really build a strong foundation of science and math with the students. So we partnered with the EVST program, as you probably know. We also teach some science and math in-house at the COT. I'm sort of assuming here that most of the students in the audience are in the bachelor's program, maybe some master's students on the 4-year campus. And at the 2-year campus, if you're interested, a few of the benefits perhaps of taking courses on our campus. One is that the class sizes in general are a little bit smaller. So if depending on your learning styles, you might get a little more attention from faculty on the 2-year campus perhaps versus the 4, depending on what the class sizes are. We try to limit the section sizes to 25 students. We do a lot of online teaching. As you can see, the technology is never perfect, but eventually we do get it right. So we do a lot of online teaching. I have students that are taking my courses, some of whom are in California. I've got a Belgian student who happens to be in Washington, D.C. right now. It makes some things like the hands-on learning things that we try to do a challenge. But one thing we do for our students is give them a 3-week practicum at the end of the spring semester. So we do a 3 weeks, or actually 2 mandatory weeks, and I'll be there for 3 weeks this spring. One thing that we're introducing this year, I guess in fact bringing back from a couple of years ago, is we're going to do a little exchange program with the Blackfeet Community College. I was just up there about a month or so ago with my department chair, Tom Gallagher, and really learned a lot. These guys have tremendous renewable resources, lots of wind, lots of sun, and they've already begun putting it in practice, so I think there's a lot to be learned up there. Another thing that's a big demand from our students here on the COT campus is to actually get some training. So beyond the education that I just mentioned, we also do a lot of training. Students will want to go on and maybe do solar installation. You can see a lot of that happening around Missoula. Some of them really have their eyes on the big wind projects like out in Judith Gap. So also during the practicum, we run out there, and there's a set of certifications that we really encourage our students to pursue at the end of the 2-year program so they can really get back there in the workforce. Another big goal is really to not have some of these higher tech jobs be taken by people coming in from outside the community. A lot of people grew up around Missoula, love the place, and really don't want to leave. And I guess being a bit of an outsider myself, I can certainly see why. Growing up, I've been through Montana several times, to Missoula a couple of times in my adult life, and really enjoy the quality of life here. I should say there, because I'm actually sitting in Philadelphia right now, but wish I was back there. So anyway, with that, if there are any questions for me at all, I know I got about 10 minutes or so, and I guess we've eaten up about 8 or so of them, half of which with technology. But anyway, if there are any questions there, maybe Professor Watson could type them in, and I could respond to them. Alternatively, you could even phone them in. My phone number at home is 610-924-9033. That's 610-924-9033. Otherwise, type away, and I'll do my best to answer.
Does anybody have any questions?
Questions now?
Short,
Okay, sounds
easy
good.
to type question. Or else we can call.
Okay.
I like the smiley face there, whoever drew that.
You want to ask him when he's going to be out here for good?
Questions?
I'm asking when he'll be out here next.
When will you be out here next? Oh, that's a nice question to ask. I'm coming back at the beginning of spring semester. Right now, I'm sitting in the basement of my house that I am trying to fix up for sale in the spring. We just put an offer in on a house there in Missoula, so hopefully the details of that will work out, and I'll be out there with my family in June. But in the meantime, I've got 4 trips planned for the spring semester, so I'll be out there right at the beginning of spring semester, also in the middle, and at the end, and for the practicum, as I said as well. So beginning of the semester, and then 3 trips additional to that before we move out for good in the summer.
Does he have any plans for sustainable energy demo
But anyway, for now,
on the new campus,
I'm,
the new COT?
for now, I'm teaching a lot of the courses online. So, got that to look forward to. It's been going pretty well, actually. The online teaching, I've been teaching using Camtasia, and what I've really been trying to do is and I'll answer that in 1 second. What I've really been trying to do is offer face-to-face versions of the course as much as possible, but then we record the entire lecture, so even if you're online, you basically see exactly what the face-to-face students do. Okay, so I see the next question. Do you have any plans for sustainable demo projects on the Missoula COT campus? I do. We have a couple plans in the works. 2 of them involve labs. I'd really like to get a wind lab going and a solar lab going. Those are both included in a project that I just submitted to the National Science Foundation. I just saw evidence of a sustainable project. I had one of my students last week drive his truck up to the back door and show me a wind turbine that he'd actually built kind of over the week. And so I sent him off and said, hey, why don't you run and actually do a few calculations on this, and we'll come back and try to quantify what its efficacy is. I'm also bringing with me a couple prototype wind turbines that I have pending patents on. I'm also in the spring bringing out 3 human-powered vehicles. If you want to see more about this, we've got some pretty neat videos up online. Human-powered vehicles are just kind of fancy bicycles. If you haven't seen them before, the world record is 80 miles an hour, if you can believe that. And it's really just a person on a machine inside a very aerodynamically shaped bicycle on a flat, windless day. We've built a few of these things similar, not the super high-tech type things that we've been going out and racing in. So I've got 3 of those coming out this spring, and I also have a set of students working on this vision of sustainable transportation that I've been trying to do with my students here at Drexel and Philadelphia. So I'm bringing some of that with me out to Missoula. I had another gentleman in my office a couple days ago who wants to build a solarium. He wants to call it a solaria, so that it's not sounding too masculine. He wants to have a I don't know what the feminine is for solarium, but anyway, he'd really like to see something like that going in at the new campus. And while there's nothing on paper, I think that would be fantastic. There's no agricultural technology, at least that I know of. I know we don't have a program of that at the COT. I know there's a lot of biology, but in terms of actual agriculture, I think it would be a great place to do some agriculture tech, some sustainable technology farming at the new campus if we get a chance to do that. So, yeah, I'm bringing wind turbines. We're actually, I just skipped my mind, we're also planning to put solar panels on 2 new buildings that the carpentry students are doing. So, yeah, we have solar going in, wind going in, the sustainable transportation models, and the solarium would be great too if we get that off the ground. So, yeah, several things in the works. In addition to a couple energy audits, beginning with my office. My office needs an energy audit in a big way. So, also, that's about we be working with trades to set up apprenticeships. So, in fact, that has already begun to some degree. So we have currently all of our students are required to do what's called an internship, and this is typically something that will go out into the community, whether they be in Missoula or elsewhere, and work with a local company for a minimum of 90 hours. That's part of their grade. So this is something that they're exposed to from the beginning. They also, as part of our NRG 242, our wind and solar class, the students actually have to do a full site assessment and design their own sustainable energy system, whether it's for one guy's got a trailer up in the woods. He's trying to put solar panels on. Several other students in this area. Another student, like I said before, in California, working on her project. So, in a lot of ways, they do their own apprenticeships, but a lot of them also go out into the community, find an internship, which can then turn into an apprenticeship. So, the answer is yes, and I think when you're saying working with trades, I'm not sure if you're referring to the welding school or the carpentry school, but we do have collaborations with them as well. So the answer to that is yes, and I even have several other projects in the works here at the COT. Okay, well, looks like time is up. Vicki, thanks so much for the opportunity, and to your class, thanks for putting up with the Skyping. I'll see you all out there in a couple months. Bye bye.
I got a few more things to say here. I want to introduce Len Broberg, chair of the Environmental Studies program, who, for the students who haven't had him yet, you're going to be seeing him in environmental regulation, a very important one of our core courses in environmental studies. He also is the person who you'll probably interact with if you want to get involved with UM-Flat and some of the sustainable living demonstration projects there at UM-Flat. Maybe he'll go on to talk about some of the other things that he's expecting to see you in someday. The 395 students may already know Len. It's probably the 195 students who haven't met him yet. And I'll just turn it over to him, let him introduce the other 2 speakers tonight.
Thanks, Vicki, and thank you to Brad. The introduction I was supposed to give to Brad was essentially to let you know that he has an extensive background in engineering. He has a BS in mechanical engineering from MIT, a master's in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan, and a PhD in biomedical engineering from the University of Michigan. And he's been teaching at Drexel before he is in the process of coming here to direct the energy technology program. So, an exciting addition to the resources we have in town. The other 2 speakers tonight are also great resources that have been in town for a while now, and we'll go one by one here, and then we'll have each of them speak, and at the end we'll have questions that you can address to either of them. The first of our speakers is Ashley Preston. She has a BA in philosophy and mathematics, a master's in resource conservation, and a PhD in forestry from here at the University of Montana. She served for 2 years as the director of the Energy Technology Program, and it was my pleasure to work with Ashley as she spearheaded the effort to put this program together. She's the one who got it off the ground and got it rolling. And she's currently adjunct faculty at the University of Montana College of Technology, where she teaches courses in the physical and biological sciences and writing. So join me in welcoming Ashley.
That's volume. I don't want to take credit where credit is not due. The other gentleman that's sitting here, Brian Kearns, who will speak next, actually bears a large part of the responsibility for having gotten the Energy Tech program at the COT off the ground as well. It was largely due to his work putting together the courses for probably, 2 or 3 years in advance of actually getting the thing going. He had started to put together the courses and outline the entire program and define some different tracks that we might take with the program. So I simply got to benefit from his expertise when it came to putting that program together. Now, Vicki asked me to come here tonight to speak in part about the program, and it's a little bit awkward, as you may have noticed. Brad Layton has taken over running the program, but he just started in September, so his familiarity with the classes and some of the other things is probably not as great as mine is. But in addition to talking about the program, Vicki also asked me to talk about careers in renewable energy, as well as the kind of training that might be required to do some of those jobs in renewable energy. So it's going to be a bit of a hodgepodge. I have probably way too many slides, and I'll warn you in advance, I'm not good at putting slide shows together, and I suspect some of these things are fuzzy, so we'll just scroll through them very quickly. But what I wanted to do is to make sure that everybody had at least some idea of what renewable energy looks like in the assessment phase, the production phase, the construction phase, and the maintenance phase, and then to talk more specifically about some of the jobs that are available. Most of the photographs that I've put up here are for large-scale renewable energy installations. That doesn't mean that there aren't small-scale energy installations. The basic principles are the same, but you will notice that what we're talking about here is a lot of heavy equipment operations. So let's see if I can figure out how to make this move. The first slides you're going to see essentially are designed to sort of get you in the mood for thinking about site assessment. And one of the first things one has to do if one is going to develop a renewable energy project, especially a renewable energy project of any great scale, is to actually go out and visit the site to see if the resource is available. One is going to have to figure out, is it available? What is the magnitude of the availability? There are a variety of different technologies that you can install on a site to find out what is the level of insolation, that is, how much sun does a site get any given time of the day and or year, how much wind does a site get. Usually you're going to start a couple of years in advance, especially if you're doing something for large-scale wind projects, to collect the data. You want to find out your wind speed, the wind directions, the frequency of the wind, a variety of different things, before you head out there to start installing these things on the ground. Also, you look for accessibility to power lines and or loads. The further you have to transmit your electricity, the worse off you're going to be. The problem is that most of the locations that are excellent for producing energy from renewable sources are in fact distant from many of the load places where we want to use this stuff. So proximity to transmission lines is extremely important. Negotiating contracts to get access to and or space on transmission lines, especially in Montana, is hugely important. So for the longest time, one of the things that has held up wind installations in the state of Montana is access to power transmission. There are plans to build more transmission lines, but I don't know if those things have gone through or not. I know there's a lot of controversy, a lot of right-of-ways. The reason I'm mentioning all of this stuff is it all involves jobs. It all involves somebody that's going to go out there and identify the locations, identify the resource, get with utility companies, find out if there's a buyer for the energy, find out at what price it can be sold, find out if you can move it. If you need transmission lines, somebody's got to put in those transmission lines, but before that you're going to have to get out there and negotiate contracts with landowners, because nobody wants to invoke eminent domain to get access to land to put up transmission lines. So lots and lots and lots of policy jobs, zoning type jobs that are associated with renewable energy installations. But let's see. Oh, there we go. The other thing that one wants to consider when doing a site assessment is what other uses that land may be currently put to, and what other uses might you be able to put that land to even while you're generating energy. One of the great things about wind and to some extent solar is that you can continue to crop underneath those wind turbines and you can continue to ranch underneath those turbines. So part of the deal is one needs to find out, and usually what happens in instances like this is that this land will remain in the ownership of the rancher and or the farmer. And this is a nice way to diversify economies for ranchers and farmers, especially in places like eastern Montana, who are hard up already in terms of getting enough from their cash crops. They diversify, they continue to ranch, they continue to farm, but they also then get to generate royalties from leases on the land for wind turbines, which can run anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 per turbine per year. And also, they may be able to negotiate for a portion of the revenue derived from the sale of the electricity. Somebody needs to be out there helping farmers and ranchers negotiate these deals, because one of the difficulties is that when wind companies go out and assess sites for wind production, if they put up the equipment and they collect the data, they own the data, which means that the rancher and or the farmer has no idea what their resource may look like. They have no idea then how to go about negotiating for equitable deals for leases and for revenue generation. So we need people that are familiar enough with, I would say, mortgages and a variety of other sort of financial instruments that can help ranchers and farmers sort their way through all of the sorts of things that go along with wind leases and wind production. The other thing is, of course, is we most frequently think of locating wind farms and other renewable energy production sites on land. But we also locate them offshore. Well, Europe locates them offshore. I think we just passed our first, we just got our first one through. It's the Cape Wind Project. A lot of negotiation had to go on to get that project up and running. I don't know, have they done the EISs on that? Have they done environmental impact statements, or they've just got the permission to move forward? You...
I think they got permission, I don't know.
Okay, there were cultural resources that were at stake there, so there was some, I don't know, I don't think it went to court, but Native American tribes had a religious ceremony that was associated with having an unbroken seascape out there, so they were against the installation of the wind turbines. Of course, a great many of the folks there in Kennebunkport were disturbed at the potential aesthetic impacts of having wind turbines offshore. Apparently, they weren't all that concerned about the aesthetic impacts of having oil rigs offshore, but there are trade-offs for any sort of energy generation system. But recognize that if you're going to put installations offshore, there are going to be a whole other host of considerations that have to be addressed. You're probably going to have somebody that's familiar with marine biology and marine ecology, because you're going to want to study the impacts on these things on marine life. It's especially important for the electrophores. What are they? The things like squid. What is the word I'm looking for here? Iridophores. The critters that have electrical capabilities. There is thought that perhaps in the process of transmitting electricity, because you have undersea cables for most of this transmission of electricity, there is some worry that there may be some interaction between them and the electromagnetic fields that are resulted or that are generated as a result of electricity transmission. There's concern that it may impact fishing. Some of the studies suggest that it positively impacts fish populations. Some studies suggest that there may be negative impacts. There are also concerns, obviously, about birds and bird strikes and stuff. Less of a concern now with the new technologies in wind turbines. They turn much slower than they used to, so we don't have quite as many bird strikes as we used to. But there are also concerns about critters that navigate using sonar, because if these, turbines tend to hum, and especially that hum and or that the mechanical resonance will carry down through the turbine. Jesus. Yeah, it's not a pylon. What do you call it? It's the tower. So if you get resonance going down through that thing and then down through to the point where it's anchored in the ocean, if you generate sound waves, and sometimes the vibrations are not the sort that can be heard by humans, but if you have critters that generate using sonar, it may in fact create difficulties for them. Again, those are places though for which studies still need to be carried out. So in other words, marine biologists, it's a great job for you. If you're thinking about wave energy, This is not the best sea to generate wave energy from because it's sort of chaotic, but nonetheless, somebody's going to have to go out there and put buoys out that will actually detect and record wave activity over a significant period of time to find out if there is a sufficient resource to warrant putting out wave energy conversion devices. The other thing that is important for wave energy conversion devices is anchoring systems. So you've got to have a suitable substrate underneath there, which means you're probably going to have somebody that can do some diving and or some other sort of tests to find out what kind of a substrate is available for you to anchor your systems. Geothermal energy. This is just one small slice of slides and or activities that one might have to engage in order to go out and find out if in fact there is a geothermal resource that is available. Obviously, if you come across thermals and vents and things like that, clearly there's a geothermal resource. But more often what they're looking for are the deep water aquifers, and those I think they use an electromagnet, some sort of a device that shoots out an electric field, and then they have another detecting device somewhere. Anyway, if you're a geoscientist and or a geologist or a hydrologist, you know what that device is, and you can teach your tech to use it, and then your tech is going to spend several weeks out in the field tromping through places in God only knows where in Nevada looking for viable geothermal resources. One thing I haven't mentioned that is of some great concern, public land managers in particular probably need to sit up and take note of renewable energy installations, because the BLM, I think it's something like requests for permits are up about 78% for geothermal exploration on BLM lands. We do have geothermal resources on a lot of the public lands in the United States. Obviously, national parks are off limits. Yellowstone, of course, is of great interest to everybody. I think there's a 6-mile corridor around Yellowstone, so no drilling in that area for geothermal resources. One of the difficulties in this, of course, is that it is possible, and this is possible for a great many renewable energy resources, it is possible to deplete the resource. And this is especially true when it comes to geothermal. One of the things that engineers have learned after many, many, many years of practice is that if you extract hot water from a hot water geothermal system, you need to pump that water back into the system. There are a variety of other techniques, hot rock technology and some other things. So if you've ever been a petroleum engineer and or a driller, you're going to have a nice, easy transition over into doing geothermal work. Essentially the same sorts of technologies, I think. Brian can probably correct me if I'm overstating the case, but nice transition. Again, obviously a nice geothermal resource. Here we have sort of the classic picture of photovoltaic panels installed on what you call a green field. This is generating electricity in a nice field. It's quite idyllic and quite pleasant. This installation up in Ontario, Canada, was a bit more controversial because this used to be a farm field. So this was at one time used to grow food crops, and the farmer figured out that he or she could probably make more money by generating electricity. So what you did is have a land conversion. It is impossible to grow a crop on the same place you're going to put in an installation of this magnitude. So, nice installation for generation of electricity, but recognize that renewable energy systems do use up a lot of land, which means that we do need to think carefully and prepare, I think, adequate environmental impact statements, both from a biological perspective, plant, as well as critters running around on these things. Another extremely large-scale installation, you can see the buildings down there in the bottom left corner, but extremely large-scale installation in Spain. Spain is way ahead of everybody else at this point in terms of solar installations. And another giant installation. This thing is 20 megawatts. I think it's the largest in the world at this point. 20 megawatts, 247 acres of land covered here. But you can see there's a lot of clearing. There's a lot of earthworks that goes into setting these things up. And then an ethanol plant. Key thing about an ethanol plant is biomass is expensive to transfer and transport. You want to locate proximate to a transportation hub and preferably proximate to your biomass sources. So if you've got feed crops or some, corn or soy or whatever else it is that you're using to produce your ethanol, you're going to want to make sure that you locate this thing proximate to a farming community. And then just some other sort of quintessential shots. Another solar generation plant. This is solar thermal. You've got a bunch of flat plate collectors, all of which are focused, they're mirrors essentially, all of which are focused on these. And I think the exchange medium is salt, but those things are designed to heat up the salt at the top of those things and eventually to boil water to generate steam, to spin a turbine, to generate electricity. But it sounds a little tacky. Somebody's got to go out there and wash the silly mirrors. We at one day hope to have automatic washing systems for these things, but at this point, if you want to retain the production, you have to keep your mirrors relatively clean. It's in the desert, so clearly water is not readily available. Just another shot, a little bit closer up there, of a solar thermal plant and another one. This is El Dorado, Nevada. What you can see here is essentially we are talking extremely large scale. One of the things that came to light, and I think this was a couple of years ago, the thought is that it's desert. Zero productivity, we can just cover the entire desert with solar panels, nothing will be harmed. Well, it turns out there is an endangered species down there, a desert tortoise, that is much disturbed by having these things out there. And in part it was the disturbance of the roads because they use trucks to drive up and down these alleyways to get at all of the collectors. So it was in part the existence of the road, it was in part the fact that there was travel on the road, and it was also in part that the habitat had been rearranged in order to accommodate the solar panels. So again, it's worth taking the time to perform the environmental impact statement to find out what kind of impacts your energy systems will have. But the bottom line is you cannot generate energy without having an impact somewhere. The question is, where do you want to have your impact and what do you want the consequences to be? So once you have essentially evaluated the site for energy production and for consequences of energy production, what you want to do then is site prep. And these are just a couple of photos. Most of these are for wind installations. Heavy equipment. If you're a heavy equipment operator, you can pretty easily find a job in renewable energy. It doesn't look like renewable energy because you're the one driving the truck, you're the one driving the crane, you're the one, making roads and doing all the other stuff that you associate with other programs that are not necessarily sustainable. But on a large scale, to install these things, heavy equipment operators, carpenters, welders, steel workers, all of these are jobs that are out there. Pouring the pad and or the foundation for a wind turbine, so cement works, a lot of rebar in there. Here's some folks bending rebar. You spend a lot of time doing this. Some of these pads will be up to 40 feet deep depending on the substrate. So you need a soil scientist out there and a geologist to find out what kind of a substrate you've got to anchor these things. If you're getting a lot of stress from wind, as these things are designed to do, they have to be well anchored to the ground, which means you have to do an awful lot of site prep for that. So they're pouring the pad, bending the rebar, getting it ready, and eventually you got to haul in all of the stuff in order to be able to put it there. Truck drivers are going to be in great demand for terrestrial installations. Obviously, if you're putting stuff in offshore, you put most of that, you deliver most of your parts via ship. You can put in much larger installations offshore because you're not worried about having to turn corners or make your way through very tiny neighborhoods with little tiny narrow streets. So we're pretty limited in terms of terrestrial installations, and I think, what do we have, a 3 megawatt? Is that as big as it's gotten, Brian? Do you know? Yeah, terrestrial. 5 megawatt offshore. Yeah, and it's just because the size of the components. You can't transport them easily. So this is just a collage of shots where you see part of the tower going down through a little tiny village in Scotland, I think. And then on the road, you're moving cars off the side. You've got some blades headed down the road here, more shots of the tower, and then the nose cone being loaded onto another vehicle there. This, I think, is a nice shot in terms of perspective. You can see a blade going on an overpass over here. It's really tricky to get these things moved from the ports because I think we may have a couple of blade production plants in the United States, but most of the blades are produced overseas, so they can get them onto ships. You get them to a port, but you got to get them from the port to somewhere in the middle of the United States. That's going to be via truck. I don't know if we transport much of this stuff via rail. Might be a good idea. Construction and installation. So we'll run through these pretty quickly. Mostly lots of cranes. Cranes are expensive, but this is the thing. If you're going to put up a wind turbine, you got to have a crane to put it up. And somebody's got to put nuts on every single one of these bolts, and there are thousands of them. Because if you will notice, the tower comes in sections. Each one of those sections is bolted together, and somebody's got to run around with a pneumatic drill that's set to a certain torque and put bolts or put nuts on every single one of those things. Also, you're really, really sad if you're the guy that set these nuts down or set the bolts down here in the concrete, and it turns out that you set them wrong for, if your template was off, You set them wrong for the tower installation, and none of the holes in the tower actually fit over the bolts that you put in. It's very sad as well. But again, more shots, big cranes, putting these things together. You see they come in components. You stack them up. And yet more shots of blades waiting to be lifted up by the crane and put on there. Somebody gets to ride these puppies up as they're going. Normally what you do is you put the blade assembly together on the ground, and then you lift up your little tripod. In this particular case, if you're not afraid of heights and you're ready to take the ride, you get to go up and run it in to fit right there on the nacelle. Then somebody's got to put all those bolts on up at the top. One of the prerequisites, well, several prerequisites for working in wind. 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago now, when I went out and started interviewing wind companies in terms of, or asking them for the skill sets that were necessary to work in big wind, they said there are 3 things, maybe 4 things. 1, you can't be afraid of heights. Duh. 2, you can't get seasick, because these things sway back and forth in the wind. 3rd, you got to be able to work in really tight, small spaces. I've got a couple of shots of the inside of the nacelle, but it gets crowded up there. You've got a generator, you've got a gearbox, you've got braking mechanisms, you've got all of your electronics and everything else all piled into this little box that's way up in the air. And if you live in Montana, it's really cold up there in the wintertime and you're working with metal. And if you live in Montana and or Arizona or in Texas, it's really hot up there in the summertime. So those were the and the other one was you had to be able to climb. And I can't remember how far you had to be able to climb in something like 12 minutes. But you got to be able to get to the top of one of these things in some certain amount of time. And I said, well, yeah, but what about training? You know what I mean? Electronics, mechanics, anything. They said, no. You just got to be able to climb. You got to be able to schlep a pack up there. And you can't be afraid of heights. Now, as the field is growing, they're requiring more specialized skill sets. So you can be a Wind Tech 1, a Wind Tech 2, a Wind Tech 3, and then you can go on and get your bachelor's degree in engineering and a variety of other things. But Wind Tech 1 is a 6-month to 1-year certification program. Wind Tech 2 is a 2-year certification program. There are several schools, many schools around the country that offer wind tech programs. They are highly specialized, and all they do is turn out people that work on wind turbines. The COT is a more generalized program. It doesn't turn out just wind tech workers. It turns out folks that are familiar with a variety of different renewable energy systems. But anyway, if you're putting these things in offshore, now this is really cool because the thing that's hard to take or realize, this, yeah, that thing right there is the same as, that thing right there. So you have to obviously have shallow enough water that it's a floating platform, that this floating platform can actually put down its pylons, and what it does is it will actually then ratchet itself up to the point where it gets its cranes up to the top of these turbines and then can put on nacelles and some other things. So really nifty device. Obviously somebody's got to be able to run that thing itself. And there are enough of these installations going in around the world that there is a call for specialized equipment to actually install offshore turbines. Another shot of the same deal, but you can see it rises up on those pylons there to do the work. Really cool thing about this is you can see he's got 3 different blades loaded on this thing, and it just goes from tower to tower to tower with the crane to put the assembly up on top of the nacelle there. And then another shot of a blade waiting to be installed. Something for perspective here. These blades are about 45 meters long. You can get a sense for the size of these things. Again, these are for offshore installations, not onshore installations. And if we are talking about renewable energy installations, it can't be all the glamour of wind. This is a hydropower installation in Laos. So these are huge earthwork projects, lots of civil engineers, lots of soil scientists, lots of geologists, hydrologists. Everybody else has to go in and do their part before you can put these things together. And small scale, geothermal. So this ground source heat pump. Somebody's got to dig this hole and somebody's got to lay all of this pipe down there. And somebody then has to go and make sure that there aren't any leaks in it before you go and dump your dirt back on top of it. Trades are very important. There's a plumber in town that actually does a lot of ground source heat pump work. And he's primarily self-taught, but he's pretty good at it. But he's also a really strong advocate for ground source heat pumps. So small scale, big scale, lots of things to do. And back to the small scale here, this gentleman is installing, actually a nice thing about these is they are photovoltaic, instead of being plates, they're actually shingles. They function as a structural unit of the house. He's installing these things. You can either have a grid tie system with the inverter installed here, or an off-grid system where you've got your batteries and your inverter to go from DC to AC, because PV generates DC current and most of your appliances will use AC current. So electricians are in great demand. There's a huge, don't know if it's been resolved, controversy between NABCEP, solar certified installers. NABCEP is North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners. These guys are the ones that have been training solar installers for maybe a decade or more and offering certifications for installations. The difficulty is that to date they have not been able to tie the system to the grid. The electricians insist that that is their job. I don't know how California finally resolved the issue between the electricians union and the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. I don't know how they resolved the conflict between NABCEP installers, solar installers, people who are trained actually to work with DC electricity as opposed to electricians who do much more work with AC electricity. But that does impact training programs, and it does impact the types of jobs that are available, because if they do decide that you have to be an electrician to install PV systems on homes and or buildings, that means you've got to go out and get your apprenticeship in the trades, in electricity in particular. Maintenance. Once you get these things up, somebody's got to do the repair work on them. So if you are a climber and you want to work in renewable energy, this is your job, blade repair. They'd rather not take these blades off. Once they're up there, they'd rather have you, if they have lightning strikes, bird strikes, anything else happens to them, they'd rather have you climb up there, rappel down, and work with the epoxies and resins just dangling from your rope, and then go ahead and rappel down and or have yourself winched back up or what have you. But kind of a cool job if you like being outdoors, kind of a cool job if you like working with heights. Also, kind of a cool job if you like hanging out in high places. Offshore, often what they're thinking about doing is actually helicoptering people out there, and they actually have, it's not a dorm per se, but they've got beds inside of these nacelles, so if they're thinking you're going to have to work on the generator for a while, you may be there for a few days. But generally speaking, you're in a terrestrial wind farm, you're going up every day, you're climbing 2, 3, 4 towers, maybe no towers. Every day you're up there, you're working on the generators, maintenance and or repair, whatever is necessary. Here though, pulled out a gearbox and retooling it there on the ground in the office. These are some not very informative pictures of the inside of a nacelle, but you get something foot down there for perspective. Some pretty cramped quarters once you get the generator, the gearbox, the braking, and everything else in there. So you can get sort of a sense of it here, but these are the sides of the nacelle, and they are pretty close to all of your equipment for your generation of electricity right there in the middle. Climbing. Not the best photo for perspective, but this is what you can plan on doing, suiting up every single day in your harness and hooking in and climbing up and down. They are instituting people lifts on some of the bigger turbines, but at this point you still have to be able to climb. So it tends to be a young man's job, a young gal's job. Any of these jobs can be done by both guys and gals, and they are willing to hire both, anybody who's competent and able. Geothermal installation, obviously lots of pipe fitter work for geothermal installations. Almost invariably your resource is a little bit distant from where you're actually using it to generate electricity. This is in Lardurello, Spain, so again, lots of pipes for transferring the heated water. And then you've got the generation systems themselves with the turbines and whatnot there and there. Somebody's got to keep the turbines in good running order, and these things are actually kind of cool when you get up close and personal with them, but you need machinists and other folks who actually know how to mess with them. All of these little blades actually come apart. I didn't bring them, I should have brought them, but the blades actually, it's not one giant big round blade that's put together, but each one of those little segments comes out and can be replaced and or worked with individually. Offshore, wave generation device here. Actually, it's kind of a wave generation device, but it's called the Dragon. And somebody had to go out and find out if there was a sufficient resource to do this. Somebody then had to build this thing. And what it's designed to do is the waves come in, they overtop the barrier right there, and then when the water builds up to a sufficient height, it actually runs out through a Wells turbine in the center and generates electricity that way. Gotta like water. I don't know if you can see over here, there are a couple of guys standing on that little platform there. You get really wet in this job. That doesn't mean you have to be out there 24/7, but if there are repairs or maintenance that have to be done, you have to be prepared to be out there messing with the water. These are some schematics and or futuristic drawings of other potential tidal current devices. Somebody's got to design these things, somebody's got to think them up, somebody's got to develop the materials, somebody's got to develop the components, everything, and it's especially difficult with ocean generation devices because of the mass of water impacting the device itself. You've got incredible stresses on that system. You want it to be responsive to the changes in current. You want it to be responsive to the changes in wave height, but it also has to be sufficiently resilient that it's not torn apart by the current and or the wave device or the waves that come through. And this is another extraordinary thing that they've put off the coast of Australia. Again, it's the waves come rushing up inside of this thing, and then they go rushing out and generate energy on the way out through a turbine. This is a much more controversial renewable energy installation. Again, lots of civil engineering goes into this thing, but it's a tidal barrage. And essentially what it is designed to do, it's like a dam. But instead of being a dam over a river, it's a dam over an estuary. And everybody that's in environmental studies should know immediately that little alarms should go off in your head when you're talking about estuary ecology as well as marsh ecology. Because essentially what you are doing is impeding the water flow and or changing the flow of the tide in and out of marsh areas with this device. Great for generating electricity, extremely reliable. You know exactly when the tide is coming in, you know exactly when it's coming out. But when you go to put these things in, you stop the water from going in entirely, which means that you've probably devastated your entire marine ecosystem on the other side of your dam. And then these are just classic shots of giant energy installations. Solar, more solar, more solar. It sounds a little boring, but somebody actually has to build these frames, and somebody has to supply them. So there are lots of machinists and lots of supply houses that do nothing but build frames, build tracking devices, and then provide outlet and service for the supports for these parabolic troughs, which are designed to, you can see right in the middle there, those are little people. So these are giant troughs in the desert that collect sunlight. Another way cool technology, a bit more human size. There's a human down there, but a Stirling engine, which is out there on the right of the screen, and then they direct solar energy onto that with mirrors, heats it up, and then it actually, it's a really cool, it's an external combustion engine. You should look up Stirling engine, they're just way cool. So this, of course, is the classic picture we have of renewable energy. Anybody know what the problem with this picture? I mean, as fun as it is and heartwarming as it is, anybody know what the problem is here? Shade. You may love your sunflowers, but I tell you what, you cover up your solar panels, you paid a fortune for those things. You cover, 5% shading on that thing, you'll cut down your electricity by 80 to 90%, your production. So even though it looks romantic to have your energy generation device there sort of displayed amongst the sunflowers, you're going to want to be ruthless, whack those things down. You want your panels in the sun all the time. Small scale devices, so not everything has to be giant. Somebody has to install these things and somebody has to work on these things. A somewhat larger scale than the one we just saw, this one you can't tip down, the one that Brian's got over at the, Hellgate Canyon there. He can actually tip that one down, which makes it a little easier, but sometimes you actually got to climb up and work on these things. Generally, you need to be certified by, especially if the thing's under warranty, you need to be certified by the company that sells it, otherwise you invalidate the warranty. They're pretty easy to work on once you figure out the basic electronics and mechanics, though. Small-scale hydro installations. One of the big things, too, is alternative and or appropriate technologies for international installations, especially small-scale. There is a big call for that, but one of the most important things, I think, is installing the right technologies at the right scale, in the right places, and not misrepresenting what the technologies can do. It's a huge mistake. Another small-scale water, manufacturing R&D, less glamorous, but somebody's got to produce all this stuff. A lot of material science, a lot of research and development. Here's a blade factory, a nacelle factory, another blade factory. Here they are working with the resins and the epoxies. Not glamorous work and kind of gross in terms of the sorts of airborne dust particles as a result of sanding this stuff down, but pretty big deal. Last bit, you got to tie it all together. Somebody's got to lay the cable to connect your wind turbines to one another as well as to a substation. So somebody has to do the utility work. That's it. Last but not least, a couple things to mention that are important. Again, people that work in policy, people that are familiar enough with the science of energy, that are familiar enough with ecosystems and how they process energy and that are familiar with the technologies to actually participate in the crafting of intelligent policies for developing renewable energy. We can do it stupid or we can do it smart. So somebody needs to be able to do that. Somebody needs to work on zoning regulations. A lot of engineering jobs. Most everything requires science. And I'm way over my time. Questions?
Why don't we hold the questions till...
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, go for it. And you, sure. There, oh.
Well, our next speaker will be Brian Kearns. Since 2003, Brian has been a research engineer in alternative energy at the University of Montana, where he helped create the College of Technology Energy Tech program. He's installed the solar, wind, and hydrogen facilities at the Alternative Energy Learning Center, or site that many of you have seen in Hellgate Canyon, which continues to grow and do interesting things. And he's also the project manager for UM's portable biomass or bioenergy generator. Prior to this, Brian held various managerial, commercial, and technical positions in the energy industry. And he's honored to serve as a member of Missoula's greenhouse gas and energy conservation team, where he initiated the Green Power Missoula program to market renewable energy certificates to help fund community energy projects. He graduated from Penn State and Northwestern universities with degrees in chemical engineering and is a registered professional engineer. So once Brian gets all set up here on his PowerPoint, we will get going. I would say, while Brian's getting this set up, if you ever have a chance to see the portable bioenergy facility in operation, and you see here that Brian's going to do a demo, or there's a field trip in a class, take that chance to go see it. It's a neat portable unit that can be towed behind a truck or a semi-trailer. And actually, you tow it behind a pickup truck, right?
No.
Semi? And I've seen it in operation, and it's a neat thing. It's a small-scale demonstration of the kind of technology that the University of Montana is looking at to replace their natural gas furnace here that they have on campus to heat steam, to heat the campus and generate electricity with that kind of operation. And so if you get a chance to check that out, definitely take that opportunity. And then the other thing that I mentioned that I'm really involved in, many of you are probably aware of the UM-FLAT project, but that's the UM Forum for Living with Appropriate Technology. It's a couple of houses and a garage that the university has allowed students to live in and modify with sustainable technology. So things like adding super insulation. We built a straw bale wall inside the garage. We're have redone the roof of the garage and are looking at passive solar in there. And many other sustainable farming and other techniques are used on the site as demonstration projects for how you can do that right here in the city of Missoula. So it looks like Brian's about ready to go. I will turn it over to him. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Lynn. Is this thing on? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Professor Watson, for such a great series. Looking over, I wasn't able to attend any of them, actually, but this one, but I wish I had the time. You listened to the class, some really great speakers on a lot of great topics, and thank you for having the tenacity of putting these things together and presenting them to the community. How do I get that goofy thing off the top? How'd you get it on there, Ashley?
Yeah, you pushed the button and got it out.
Okay, we'll deal with it. We'll deal with it. So, Vicki asked me to talk about bioenergy, which is one of the projects that I've been doing for 4 years now, along with some of the other alternative energy things that have come up in the discussion. But I'm just going to focus on this, and we'll take questions if you have anything else at the end. So biomass means different things to different people in different parts of the country. If you say biomass in, say, Wisconsin or Iowa, you're talking about ethanol, right? You say biomass here in Montana, and you're talking about mostly wood. So biomass means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And this is how I define it. So it does include, you know, crops, agricultural crops, the residue from those crops, wood, and then animal and municipal waste are also considered biomass, as well as algal growth and fungus. So biomass is renewable, right? Everybody knows that you can plant more trees, get more energy, right? Renewable. Is it sustainable? Show of hands, yes? No? Maybe? It's complicated, isn't it? Because you probably, I snuck up on that other slide there. So, yeah, it really depends, right? So in a lot of people's minds, sustainable is equatable to renewable. You know, people use those words interchangeably, alternative, sustainable, renewable. To me, they have very specific, precise meanings, but I'm an engineer, and that's the way I think. So here's a perfect example on the island of Espanola, right? You have two countries, the Dominican Republic on one side and the country of Haiti on the other side. And there's the dividing line right between the two, so you can see the Dominican Republic, for whatever reasons, have preserved their forest biomass, whereas the country of Haiti has not. So very dramatic. So despite that it's renewable, does not necessarily mean it's sustainable. Okay, keep that in mind. So what's good about biomass? We just talked about renewable and maybe sustainable. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's abundant. How many people think it's carbon neutral? Show of hands. Yes? No? How many people are asleep already? So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but think about that. It's non-intermittent. This is an important thing. Most of the technologies that Ashley was showing you are intermittent technologies, solar and wind principally, although geothermal could be in the same category as biomass. In other words, if you have a geothermal resource, you can have potentially 24-hour service, 7 days a week. Same with biomass. Same type of thing where you can, if you keep putting in biomass in the top, you keep getting energy out of the bottom. So it's one of two technologies that, renewable technologies that could be, non-dispatchable, what they call. And this is really good for electrical utility companies because they like to throw fits about tying wind, especially wind farms, into the systems because they don't know when the wind's coming on and they don't know how long it's, or how, the strength is coming on. They don't know when it's going off, and the supply doesn't change or the demand doesn't change. So they have to be able to what they call dispatch, either shove off some additional electricity that they're getting from coal plants, from nukes, from hydro plants, in order to turn on the wind. Then they have to be able to turn those things back on, right, when the wind drops down or the solar drops down. So those things cause them fits, and they don't like to do that. So they really try to badmouth and they do what they call firming. When you add wind to a utility grid, you have to actually add some additional traditional generation in order to what they call firming it. So in other words, if the wind goes offline, you still have some additional generation to back it up, basically. Another nice thing, potential of biomass is biochar. Anybody heard of biochar? So what is biochar? It's basically the residue after you combust biomass, the charcoal or ash or whatever that's left over. People are proposing it as a way of carbon sequestration, of taking carbon out of the atmosphere, because plants, as they grow, right, they absorb carbon dioxide, take it out of the atmosphere. And then if you combust it in particular ways, you can maximize the carbon that's left in that char, and you put it in the ground, where it acts as a soil amendment. It helps the fertility of the plants that grow on the soil. So here's a method of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere where we really don't want it and putting it in the ground where it does us some good and some help. So you'll hear a lot more about biochar. There's a lot of activity going around about it as a way of carbon sequestration. What time does you want me to finish by 8:30? 8:45. Okay. So there's problems with biomass, and you can read them all here. But there's always issues, as Ashley pointed out. There's always a trade-off, right? And I'm an engineer, and as an engineer, you're always working with compromises, always trade-offs. You have to, look at systems and maximize them for the things that you want, minimize them for the things that you don't, but you never have it all one way or the other. So there's always compromises, and these are some of the compromises that you got to deal with biomass. So is biomass really green? We had some questions earlier. And recently this year alone, there's been, I'll call 3 black eyes or 3 strikes against biomass. And the first one was in the spring of this year, and it's the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, came out with what they call a tailoring rule. And they are taking a look at all the air pollutants and designing new standards and looking at them in ways to just deal with the air quality problem in a more comprehensive fashion. And you may have noticed that EPA, at least now, who knows what happens after the new Congress takes over, but at least now they're assuming that they have jurisdiction over greenhouse gases and the obligation to start managing and mitigating greenhouse gases. That's a really controversial topic, but right now they're assuming they have that power, and they're working on that. So this tailoring rule dealt biomass a black eye by saying a biomass carbon dioxide molecule is no different than a fossil fuel carbon dioxide molecule. Does that make sense? Really, carbon dioxide in the air is what we don't want, right? So no matter where it comes from, right, it's a problem. Everybody believe that? Yeah? No? I'll challenge the statement in a minute here. But the second black eye came from the state of Massachusetts earlier in the year, commissioned the Manomet Center here to do a thorough biomass study to be used in the state of Massachusetts. And the study, the minute it was published, there were 2 conservation organizations that pointed to the study and said, biomass is good because the study says so. And then some other researcher looked into it and came out with this quote. And if you Google that, you'll find 1,000 different media outlets grabbed this and ran with it. So wood is worse than coal. And that ran in all the media headlines, and it just sent the biomass industry scrambling, trying to counter it. In fact, 10 days after that study came out and those headlines were running in all the media outlets, the Manomet study itself issued another paper basically saying that their study results were inappropriately interpreted, and this stuff is not really to be believed. The bottom line is it's a complicated subject, and these studies really point that out. And you just can't look at media headlines like something like that and make a brash judgment on it. The third one that just happened, you might have read this. This was in the Independent. I think it actually broke here in Montana. There was a NASA study of Yellowstone in conjunction with University of Minnesota, and they looked at dead biomass, dead trees, red trees standing. And a lot of policy, especially Senator Tester's biomass policy, was premised on the idea that dead trees equal extreme fire danger, right? Does that make sense? You got a bunch of dead trees sitting around in a forest, chance of it going up in a conflagration are greater. Well, this study says, well, not necessarily, because as the trees die and all the needles, which contain a lot of the volatile organic compounds, which mostly burn in a fire, drop to the ground and decompose rather quickly. Once that happened, then the fire danger actually diminishes. So these 3 studies just kind of dealt biomass, again, a black eye this year. All these things are complicated, and you can actually draw opposite conclusions, but I just wanted to point that out. One of the reasons why that one study said wood is worse than coal is because actually it is. And that is, when you look at the energy density of wood versus coal, 1 ton of wood equals 16 decatherms, if you know what they are, or 16 million BTUs. The same amount of energy, so 1 ton is what, 2,000 pounds. So the same amount of energy is contained in 1,300 pounds of coal. So you need less coal to make the same energy, right? Conversely, you need more wood to make the same kind of energy. And the wood, you know, is giving off more CO2 as a result of that. So to get the same kind of energy output, you're actually giving off more CO2 initially. Now what they don't factor in is that over time, the forests regrow and resequester the carbon dioxide. So, and I'll show you some graphs here in a minute, but over time, the wood is a better preferable option, but that of course is totally skipped by the media. So what's happening is, you know, you have an active carbon cycle, and that carbon cycle is basically looking at right here is, I guess my pointer's dead. You have in the green box the terrestrial or biocentric carbon balance. So you have biomass that's sequestered in plants and carbon that's in the atmosphere in the form of what? Carbon dioxide and possibly methane, 2 greenhouse gases. And there's an active exchange that's going on all the time between these two. It's an active global carbon cycle. Now what's changing is when we use fossil fuels is we're adding additional carbon up here, right? And this is part and parcel with living. The carbon cycle is just going to be there. But when we start taking out fossil fuel, we're adding more up here. Now some of this carbon that's in this is actually going to be sequestered, usually in dissolution in the oceans. So part of climate change, it's not really climate change, but it's ecosystem change, is as more carbon dioxide is dissolved in the oceans, it becomes more acidic. And that's a problem, especially for shellfish and coral, because they secrete a material, calcium carbonate, that is actively eaten away by acid. So the higher the acid content of the ocean, the less you're going to have shellfish and corals. So here's an interesting graph, and it says a lot, and I don't want you to really look at it. I'll point out what I want you to see. That is, we have alternative uses for biomass. One is we can, not do anything with it, leave it in the forest, right? Just leave it as a overstock. We can burn it as fuel, or we can do other things with it. We can, we burn it as fuel. I'm sorry, no, it's right here, this one. We use the biomass and produce energy from it. That's this curve here. So what happens is, this is looking at just 1 year's point in time, the emissions of carbon dioxide that happen from these activities and how they decay over time. 1 year activity in 2005, this is a study done in California. So if you burn 1 ton, or 1 million bone-dry tons of biomass, you get an initial extreme impact of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that's what this is showing right here. Now instead of doing that, let's say we didn't do that. We had this biomass and we didn't burn it. But let's say what's usually one of the options is, and you'll see a slide of this in here in a minute, is open burning. You take these slash piles and you just burn them in the open. What happens there is because burning in the open is not as controlled a condition, doesn't have the proper mixture of air and other things, it's up here. So you go from this level of carbon dioxide and methane up to here. And because you have incomplete burning, you also have carbon, or you have methane that's being expelled into the atmosphere as well. So it's really increasing the greenhouse gas effect in the initial, but then over time, because methane does not have the same longevity in the atmosphere that carbon dioxide does, it decays back into carbon dioxide, so over time it basically comes down to the same level. And there's a couple other things. If you compost, you have similar issues, but composting, because of the decay in the carbon dioxide and carbon or methane given off, it has a delay activity. So if you do it in this year, it kind of peaks 5 or 6 years later, then drops down again. If you have landfills, same type of thing. You landfill something, you don't have an immediate peak, but you have a delayed peak that comes up and down. So all these things are looking at alternative uses. So the biomass is alternative uses, right? And we want to pick the best use that we can for the biomass. And some people say, well, just leave it alone, leave it in the forest. Well, there is a price to pay with that, and that's this one right here, called the net effect of thinning. So what happens if you leave biomass in the forest? It's overstocked. There's too many trees, too many plants competing for too few resources. They're all competing for sunlight. They're all competing for water, for minerals, and all that. So they become stressed. I think one of Steve Running's earliest, I think, studies showed that as resources change, as say water, access to moisture drops, the first thing that has to happen is the tree canopies have to condense, have to retract. If they don't, then you have overstressed forests. Overstressed forests are what? They're likely for disease, for pest predation, infestation, and then they're more likely to what? Burn. So if you do nothing with your forests, you get this overstocked issue, and then you have a higher potential of burning, of dying and destroying through disease and insect infestation. So doing nothing also has its ramifications. So this is just looking at alternative fates for biomass. Again, this is looking at a California study in 2000. The data is from 2005. So if you look at the annual fuel use, what they're doing here is they divided all their biomass into different, this is mill residue, forest residues, agricultural residues, and urban wood waste. If you weren't using this for fuel, this is probably what these different things would go to. So the mill waste would just be landfilled, basically. Forest waste would be go to forest accumulation and open burning. Ag waste would go to open burning and landfills, as well as maybe some composting and some fire or some kiln boiler fuel. And then urban wood waste would go primarily to landfills as well. So what's that telling us? This is the net effect of all the biomass carbon benefits, and this is the fossil fuel displacement. So by using that biomass for energy, for either heat or electricity, you're not putting this amount of carbon dioxide in the air or greenhouse gases in the air. So obviously we have a net, this is good down here, below zero is good, up here is bad. So over time we have a net positive effect. So this is actually a local photo taken by Chad Harder of the Independent. You might have seen it in the Independent this past week. This is, where is this? I think up somewhere on the Flathead. So these are slash piles burning, right? So we've harvested, we've done some treatments to this forest, we've taken some wood out, and we left these big piles of slash behind. And so now we just go out and burn them. So as you saw before, by not using them for energy, we're adding more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide and also methane. Plus all the pollutants, right? I'm just talking about greenhouse gases. We're not talking about particulate matter, carbon monoxide, or other volatile organic compounds that come off of a burning process like this. Again, another close-up of a slash pile, just burning where it is. Again, a lot of energy. And a lot of times they're required to do this. If you go and you harvest, if you do treatment in any kind of forest, you're required to do something with the what they call slash. You either have to haul it off, which is usually uneconomic, or you got to wait till it dries, and then a year or two later you go back and burn it. So hopefully I've shown you that there is some positive effects of biomass. The carbon neutral thing is sort of a complicated issue, as I said. The university is looking at doing a biomass project. I'm sure you heard about it. In fact, it's going to the Board of Regents, tomorrow? Yeah. So, and I've got a little information sheet if anybody wants one of it. Actually, this is the sheet that's actually going before the Board of Regents up here. So this is what's going to happen if we do this biomass boiler. This is actually the company that we're looking at contracting. It's called Nextera. And this is the type of system they use. It's not a combustion system. It's called gasification. So people think of wood, they think of flames, they think of heat, and they just think, okay, you're just burning wood. Well, that's not really the case. It's a thermochemical process, but what we're doing here is we're just heating the wood up in the relative absence of oxygen, so it's not allowed to burn completely. What it does is it produces a gas called a producer gas or a synthetic gas or syngas. And then that gas comes up and it goes into here, and this is where we add oxygen to the gas and heat it up, and basically it comes out as a big flame right here. So this is more of the process. So this is the gasifier, this is the oxidizer, here's the flame, this is the boiler, so it's making steam. The steam comes out here and it goes to all the campus buildings. And the flue gas goes to this, what's called an electrostatic precipitator, cleans all the noxious things out of it, and then goes out to vent to the atmosphere. Now, one of the questions that Vicki asked me was, is this thing clean? Can it pass muster here, especially in Missoula air quality control, especially in periods of time when we have inversions? So I'm going to skip this. I'm going to skip that too. Here's what we're looking at. Here's a bunch of different technologies. This is wood combustion. This is just burning wood, right? Even in a controlled, I guess this would be the controlled boiler. This is gasification. So you can see there's quite a bit of difference between the emissions output per year between these various technologies. So yes, it can be clean. This is a couple of the systems that this company has already built. This one is in University of Northern British Columbia. Actually, this one is being built. This is sort of still a architect's rendition. This is one that's been built in Victoria, British Columbia. It's this unit right here, a gasification system. This is one at Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee. It's this building right here. Oops. So I'm not sure what the one, if we go forward with the one here in the university will be. It'll be a big one. I think it's going to be one of the biggest ones they've built because they had to do some tests up there this company's from Canada. And they had to send some Montana wood up there to test it to make sure that it can perform as advertised with this much larger gasifier. So is biomass sustainable? There's really two really good recent reports that came out in the last couple of years. And one is by a colleague here, Todd Morgan at the Bureau of Business and Economic Research that came out in 2009. Very good look at the sustainability, or actually just the quantity of biomass in Montana. And then this is another report that just came out earlier this year. That's actually looking at western Montana specifically and looking at sustainable biomass generation. And I'll show you a couple figures from that. These are just tables cut out of those reports. So the take-home thing here is we got, 725 million dry tons of biomass from live woody biomass. This is dead trees. This is already standing dead trees, and we have another 136 million dry tons of dead standing trees. So it's over 860 million tons, of biomass in the state of Montana. Let me see, I got. So currently, Montana uses about 1.7 million bone-dried tons a year. We used to be 2.7, but when Smurfit Stones shut down, they took away 1 million dry tons when they closed. Just looking at this and that, we have over a 500-year supply. But that's not really a good look at it. This is taking some of that same data, looking at all the trees throughout all the Montana timberlands, and running it through some filters that might start to address some of the sociological concerns we have with harvesting trees in the forest. So we're looking at trees that are, for one thing, these are non-reserved timberlands. So anything that's a park, wildlife zone, there's a couple exclusionary designations that would be eliminated from this. You eliminate all that, and roadless areas, all those are eliminated. So any kind of biomass that's within a half a mile of the road, a slope less than 40 degrees, so you don't have to use cabling or helicopter removal systems. Young forests under 100 years, and then for smaller diameter trees, anything below 11 inches basically. So even with that, we have what, almost 40.2 million dry tons of biomass available. That other study was looking specifically at western Montana. So here's what they came up with. We have logging residues of 333,000. This is 1,000 million bone-dried tons per year. Mill residues, you can read the numbers. And so the total of these three categories is 826,000 bone-dried tons per year. They're not even looking at the standing dead tree inventory of 253 million, 1,000 bone-dried tons. In Missoula County alone, we have 124,000 bone-dried tons and mill residues of 263. And the UM plan is scheduled to use about 20,000 tons a year. So this is, this is the percent of UM utilization would be of just Missoula County residues alone. With that, I'm gonna, let me see. Let me just, I just drew this in here as a bonus. I said earlier about biomass and how in some areas of the country biomass is equated to ethanol. And what do people think of ethanol? There's been a lot of, again, mass media, popular media reports on ethanol, and is it really green, and does it actually recover the amount of energy that went into it? How many people think that it does? It has actually a net output of energy versus energy inputs? Anybody? How many think it doesn't? How many think it's below? So I see a number of hands there, yeah. There's been a number of studies. There's this guy here, he's a pretty famous researcher, Yale, I think, I can't remember. But he did 2 reports that show that the net energy value of ethanol is way below 0. Here's 0 here, and he's shown we're way down here. At least he's consistent. He did a study back in '91 and 2001 and hasn't changed really. A couple other scientists, including this guy here was a former soil scientist here at the university, again are below the 0 line. But then a whole bunch of other studies, done through this whole time frame that are showing it above. And of course, when you see data like this, again, like showing you, you have these complicated studies, and the popular media just grabs, whatever they want to in order to, underline or emphasize a point they want to make. They're basically complicated. So to really understand any of these studies, you have to basically look at them, read them, and understand what assumptions they make, or those assumptions make sense. If you look at the average of all these people together, it shows that ethanol production, including all the inputs, all the fossil fuels that go into tractoring and putting in fertilizer and all that stuff, there's about a 25 to 35% net gain of energy from that system. Oh, that's, yeah. Let me just stop there and have some time for some questions.
Thanks, Brian.
Ashley, do you want to come up too, and we can have people ask questions as they wish?
I do that.
Okay. So any questions for Ashley or Brian? Yeah.
I'm really impressed with the programs that are being offered by the College of Technology, but are you also looking at what institutionally has to be changed to adapt these? Like some of the things that have come up through this lecture series would be wonderful to do, but some of them are illegal in the city of Missoula. So are you addressing what needs to happen code-wise, legislation-wise, to make it possible for all of us to participate in this?
For me.
Go for it.
At the COT personally, no. I'm not aware of students that are involved in trying to change the policies. I mean, that's one of the things I'd like to, I mean, as I said in my presentation, one of the things that has to change is zoning codes, policies, all over the country, but certainly in Missoula. So Brian may have more experience of that, and Dr. Layton may also come up against that as he's trying to do some of his installations. But to date at the COT, I don't think we've addressed it directly. Brian may be doing that with the biomass, though. No? I mean,
The question was, is it illegal?
No, in order to do some of the different, like, could I do a biomass composter in my backyard?
Sure.
I don't think the city of Missoula would allow it.
Composting?
Well, composting, yes, but to do it where there was a burn to it, to do the a smaller version of what you're doing?
Gasification?
Yeah.
You know, there's a permitting procedure, and I had to get mine permitted. What they do is they look at the maximum output over a year's annual basis, and if you exceed certain levels, then you're required to get a permit. Okay, and you know, that's the process. And if it's below those limits, you're excluded. You don't have to get a permit. Mine was excluded. So in my gas, I didn't show any pictures of it, but I have a fairly large gasification system. It's about enough energy for 5 or 6 homes, and that was excluded from Missoula Air Quality Control. So yeah, you could, if you're talking about that size.
Right. But I mean, like, we just changed, Lane over here was successful in getting the city council to finally address that wind was illegal till a couple months ago.
It wasn't actually illegal. It wasn't addressed in the zoning codes, and yeah, and that was successfully passed. Actually, they went through and they're looking at all sorts of codes, and they had a nice piece in there about wind turbines, and then they just deleted it. They just wholesale deleted it, and then when is Lane here? Oh, hi. I've heard a lot about you. Yeah, so when he wanted to put up a turbine, you know, he ran up to, there's no coating allowed in Missoula, but now there is. So yeah, there's those things that occur. Of course, we put up the Hellgate wind turbine before any of this, and we didn't have any issues with that. Some of this stuff is pioneering, you know. Sometimes the cities haven't really had to deal with any of this stuff. So, you know, when you're the first one out there, it's like, you know, no, you can't do that. And you have to find ways of working around it and getting the, you know, proper codes and everything in place so that you prevail.
Well, and sort of following up with that, are you looking at any sort of R&D that you will try to pursue, you know, the possibility of encouraging manufacturing here?
Manufacturing?
Of like solar cells or any kind of just all the different systems. They're alternatives to coal.
That
Fields.
doesn't need any, I don't think any R&D. It's basically a business question. I mean, if you're going to do something like that, you know, what are the business parameters that drive you to do that or not to do that? And part of that would be the siting, where are you going to site your thing? I'll tell you what, Montana's not high on anybody's list of places to go, because, we're so far removed from centers of population, basically, as Ashley pointed out before, with, your ethanol plant, you want to have your production as close to the consumption as possible. So if your consumption are on the two coasts, why would you site, production in the middle of the country where you're going to incur lots of transportation costs both ways, because you're going to have to haul materials into, put the material together, whatever you're doing, wind turbines or solar, and then you're going to have to ship it right back out. So for those reasons, I mean, there are people that are doing things here. GT Solar has a facility here. I don't think they do any manufacturing. Wind Turbine Tools has a thing up in Lincoln where they're worldwide. They produce wind turbine tools that they ship out worldwide to work on wind turbines. So I mean, people do it, but it's a business decision rather than an R&D decision.
I wanted to ask about, what types of jobs require an engineering degree and what types of jobs this certification program at the College of Technology would be sufficient for. Could you give us some examples from each of those? I know you kind of talked about it as you were going through your slideshow, but in terms of, which of those jobs really need an engineering degree and which don't, and even if they don't require an engineering degree, maybe they still require a lot of physics, and especially electrical, physics of electricity, as well as math.
Do you want to start, or? I mean, I can take a stab. There's so many jobs out there. It depends on how far up the food chain, I suppose, you want to go as to whether or not you're going to be satisfied with a one-year tech degree or certificate, or wanting to go all the way up and do PhD research or something. But I think material science and R&D, you're probably going to need to be master's or PhD, especially if you're working in, solar stuff, they're looking at nanotechnologies, a lot of bio things. If you're looking at producing fuels from algae, you're looking again probably at PhDs or masters in research and development for those things. The wind tech jobs that I showed you, if you're willing to climb turbines, and you can do that for day in and day out, or you're willing to install solar panels on rooftops, you're talking basic industry certifications in some instances. Or if you want to be a little higher on the food chain in terms of income, then you're going to get a 2-year certificate possibly from one of the schools that offers an AAS degree in wind tech training. But a lot of those, once those installations are in place, you're talking about business management. So you're talking folks with MBAs. The fellow who runs the wind farm out in Judith Gap has an MBA, and he's the operations manager. He just went with GE at some point, and they gave him the training to work on the wind turbines. So that was just a 1 or 2 year training program with GE. I think, obviously, if you're doing any of the stuff with marine ecology or marine biology, if you're looking at offshore installations, if you're looking at developing any of these systems, you probably have a higher engineering degree. You really do need to know something about mechanics. You need to know something about how energy works and how built systems transfer or convert energy from one form to another. That's going to require hard sciences. You're going to need to know physics. You're going to need to know chemistry, especially, is important for a lot of those renewable energy things. At what level? It depends on where you want to go. If you just want to be sort of basic research or assistant to somebody else, you could probably do it with a 4-year degree. I think the industry itself is sort of in flux because it's new enough that it hasn't even necessarily identified the required skill sets for any one type of energy production. And that's been great, actually, for folks that have been doing renewable energy for 30 years. They've got 30 years worth of on-the-ground experience that probably outclasses anything that an engineer, even from an upper university, could bring to a project. So at this point, I think the field is in flux, but I know I'm not helping giving you specific answers here, but if you're looking at being an energy manager or an energy engineer, obviously you're going to need an engineering degree. If you're looking at being an energy manager, you're looking at needing something, in the sciences as well, then possibly as in business. Oregon Institute of Technology actually has a renewable energy degree for engineering, and it's a 4-year program. They come out with the Oregon Institute of Technology, and that, I think they're one of the first 4-year programs for a BS in it, or for a renewable energy engineering degree. I think there are a few others that are cropping up at this point, but obviously the skill sets are in high demand.
What about just installing?
You can do it with an industry certification. And maybe not even that, depending
Where do
on
you
the...
get industry certification?
We're trying to offer them at the COT. It's a bit of a challenge at this point. We do offer the NABCEP entry-level exam, and that's the first step, essentially, to becoming certified for installing solar panels. Now, at this point, I don't think zoning even requires that your solar installer be certified in any fashion whatsoever. So at this point, somebody could just hang out a shingle and say, I can and will install solar panels, call me. But at some point, the industry, I think, wants to become more standardized, and to do that, they're probably, I don't know if they'll go with the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers or if they're going to go with the NABCEP standards, but these are nationalized tests. We've tried to get them offered here in Missoula. Again, the problem is, who wants to come to Missoula? I mean, they're going to offer them in places like Denver, and they're going to offer them in places like Seattle, and they're going to offer the tests in places like San Francisco. They're not going to offer them in Missoula, in part because one of the things that goes along with these different levels of certification is you've got to participate in X number of installs, and then you've got to actually lead 1 or 2 solar installs, and there just isn't that much activity up in Missoula to actually be able to run the workshops that they need in order to be able to generate the capital to have the instructors up here to run those things. So it's not impossible. That's one of them. You can get your Home Energy Rater certification. Yeah, your HERS. And this is huge. I mean, that's something we didn't touch on here, but I mean, energy production is only one side of the coin. The other huge side, the big issue, is actually energy efficiency. And there are more opportunities for getting LEED accredited or certified. So building accredited or certified, and is the person accredited or certified, I can't remember which. But LEED certification is available, and training is available up here. You can also get HERS training up here. There's a couple places in Helena that do that. Also, insulation and lighting and Energy Star appliances, the building materials that you use for LEED, it's even more strict. Most of you leaders in environmental and energy design, I think is the name of it. But it's a nationally recognized standard. We have a couple of LEED Silver buildings on campus, or one?
Silver.
LEED Silver on campus, and so they've met some pretty high standards in terms of energy efficiency, water usage, and a variety of other things, materials that they use, the amount of waste generated in production and construction. So the COT degree program, this is something we've wrestled with over there, and that is that we've tried to avoid certification. We've tried to avoid specialization. And in exchange for that, what we've said is we need to give students, what we've opted for is education as opposed to training. Because one of the difficulties you discover with training is you're very quickly outsourced as the technologies innovate, and they do change extremely rapidly in the renewable energy field. However, if you understand the basics of technology, if you understand the basic science, if you understand the basic physics and the basic chemistry, you can then learn whatever you need to learn when a new technology hits the market. So it's been a bit of a struggle for us, but the take we have on it at the College of Technology is that you're better prepared to learn if you come out with an AAS degree as opposed to a 6-month industry certification that teaches you how to work on this piece of equipment. With our assumption, you should be able to then move further up the food chain with your degree in 2 years. And some of the folks, quite a few of the folks actually opt to go into 4-year programs as well, rather than just stopping with the 2-year. So.
Go from COT to engineering program?
You can't go, it's hard to go from anywhere into an engineering program other than from an engineering program to an engineering, and you might correct me on that, but engineering programs have some pretty high thresholds in terms of entry requirements, and their big thing is science, 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 and then math, 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 math. So if you want to go into engineering, you need to start early getting your science and your math. And engineering is a great thing, but I think you also need people that can think seriously about the implications of the devices that have been engineered once they are deployed in the social and the environmental context. So it's not always about engineering, and or one can at least think more broadly than just engineering, and Brian will probably have a word with me when I leave. But It's important to have an understanding of the technology. It's also important to have an understanding of the context in which that technology is deployed. But you have to have both, really, to make sense of things.
Brian, what's the energy input then to start the gasification process with the type of boiler that we're looking at putting in here, the gasification system for biomass? What are they using to heat the wood to gasify it?
The reactions are exothermic.
Okay.
So, I mean, so when you start up, you're going to have to use something, a flame torch or something, or they probably use natural gas to get that thing going.
But once
it's going,
starts,
it's
then
going
you
to
just
generate
feed-
its own
Then you
heat.
just feed more fuel in it, it keeps it going.
Yeah.
So there's minimal energy.
So what are you gonna do with your biochar?
Well, I've been giving it to a couple organizations. There's some student group here, 1,020 Gardens.
Yeah.
They took a couple bags of my biochar. I've been giving it to a group up in Helena called Sustainable Obtainable Solutions. Gloria Flora, I don't know, she's a fairly well-known activist. She's high on this biochar concept, and they've been taking some of my biochar as well.
Where's the line of energy in and energy out for biodiesel? Is it below 0.2?
No, in fact, I had I had 1,000 slides that I didn't show. Biodiesel is about 1.25 times out than in.
And where was gasification in the one? Where did it fit?
It's strongly positive, because it's exothermic. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's strongly positive.
Well, if that's all the questions, I want to remind the students to pick up their career plans before you leave tonight and turn in anything else you're supposed to turn in. And let's thank our speakers.